we are in a crisis of an aging workforce. We are in a crisis of a workforce that, desperately needs to replenish itself and have that diverse perspective. And there was that roundtable at the White House that they basically finally acknowledged that this could be a national security concern, right, for us, because we have to stay at the front end of being able to build out this infrastructure and all the critical infrastructures, not just data centers, but hospitals and bridges and roads and power plants and, you name it. So getting that workforce to join us and changing the industry to make it more palatable, more longer livelihoods, safer environments, all of that is going to matter to every human being.
Welcome to The Power of Construction. We're recording live at Groundbreak. And this week, we're sitting down with industry leaders who are evolving their businesses today to create a better industry tomorrow. I'm Sasha Reed.
And I'm Chris Langiza.
And today we have the pleasure of sitting down with an incredible leader who has really made a name for herself, not only as Chief Innovation Officer, but also as a woman in construction and as a female leader in the industry. We've done a lot in talking to leaders around the productivity gap, and we started to do more than just understand what are the factors. We've actually started to do some root cause analysis. Today, as we sit down with our guest, we're going to take that even one step deeper to really look at the power of culture, diversity, and really looking at the impact that women are having within the construction industry. So with that, let me introduce you to our guest. Nancy Novak is the Chief Innovation Officer for Compass Datacenters. She has over 3 decades of experience pushing boundaries of innovation, sustainability, and advocacy for women in the construction and technology fields. She's an advisor of the Council of Masons with a special focus on increasing diversity in technology and construction industries. She's also board of the direct vice chair of the National Institute of Building Sciences, BIM Council, with a special focus on workforce development. She's also received quite a few awards. She's 2023's Luminary Award, which was inducted into the Infrastructure Masons Hall of Fame in recognition of her contributions to the industry, which include extensive work in recruiting and mentoring the future workforce. And in 2022, she was the winner of Construction Business Owner Magazine's Outstanding Women in Construction Awards, which typically recognizes women who have significantly contributed to gender diversity, as well as supporting the next generation of leaders. She's also a podcast host, so we're putting her on the guest seat for once, and that host of the show, Extending the Ladder, a podcast about women in construction technology. And if you haven't given a listen to, I highly recommend you do, because there is a cast of leaders who are interviewed on her podcast who are completely dialed into how we're advancing the industry. So I encourage you to subscribe. So with that, Nancy, welcome to the show.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And that was a very generous introduction.
We're so grateful to have you here.
It is not often, as a leader, you get to sit back and hear your own resume or the highlights, because that's not your resume, but the highlights of your resume. But I think that's a piece of what we're going to do here today, is really tap into that body of experience of work you've had and really kind of dive into some of these challenges around how our cultures can improve the workforce and the experience of women in industry. Before we get started, I do want to give a little contextual statistical information so we can look at this conversation through the lens of data. And Chris and I kind of tag team in this podcast of being data and people focused. But I think it's important that we actually look at what the data tells us. So according to McKinsey and Lean In, women in the workforce for 2024, they produced a 10th anniversary report on the number of women in the executive roles. And across industries, women currently represent 29% of C-suite positions, and that number was only at 17% back in 2015. So almost a decade later, we've made some progress. If we look at that same statistical data through construction as an industry vertical, we're looking at 1.4% of C-suite leaders being represented as women. And if we look at heavy construction, that goes a little bit further to 1%. So clearly, the data is telling us that when we're talking about gender diversity, this isn't just a social impact issue. This becomes very much an economic issue. So the first question I have for you is, From your experience and hearing the statistics, what do you think companies actually lose, especially in construction, by not having women as more represented within that C-suite?
Well, I mean, they lose a lot of innovation. They lose a lot of experience and knowledge. You know, what I always say is like, if you really want to stay on the front end and stay relevant in any industry, you have to have all sorts of diversity of thought and experience and so forth. Women represent all types of diversity, right? And if you have teams, especially at the decision-making level, that are similar, and they have similar upbringings, they have similar educations, they have similar thought processes and experiences, then it's going to be impossible for you to step outside of that and come up with different ways of doing things and doing things better. I always say, like, as humans, we're limited, right? Our brains only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced, and we can't know any more than that. So if you don't bring that diversity to the table, you lose out on so much talent and so much experience and so many ideas, because we are limited as humans. So it's way beyond, just the right thing to do. It's a huge and strong business case for companies to figure this out so that they can get better. And our industry is ripe for change.
And so let's look at that. What's the flip side of this then? What's the upside for companies and your company clearly is a great example of this. What's that upside look like?
Yeah, I mean, the upside is that you get to stay relevant and you continue to grow and you are more profitable, flat out. And there's so many great statistics that are kind of data points where they say if they have a woman on a board, and this is across any industry, that these companies are typically 20% more profitable than any other company. Now, it's interesting because it's a data point, right? Is there a correlation there? I think so, but it's a very strong data point that's empirical, and you can't argue with that. So there's definitely a huge business case on being more profitable because you can evolve and you can innovate and you can continue to grow and improve what you're doing for business. At Compass, we have a very strong culture, and I know we're going to talk more about that, Sasha, and I'm very excited about that. And our culture is strong, and what we try to say about it is as a byproduct, we get more diversity, more better hires. So like at our C-suite, we have over 20% female representation, where you were just saying in the C-suite in the industry, it's only 1.4%, right? In our senior leadership, we're at 30%. In our actual construction management forces in our field, we are at 90% in Compass, right? So, and I know that this is probably a questions you were going to ask in the future, but I want to say that I get so excited about it. And I just want to make sure that the takeaway on this is it's possible, and they're thriving and they're crushing it.
Yeah, there's no excuse not to do it. I mean, who doesn't want to be more profitable?
Right.
And so clearly, I think your background and your own experience is probably playing a role into how you're leading and how you've made this a very intentional piece of the business. Tell us a little bit about your journey into construction and how that's really shaped the intentionality of how you're leading today.
Well, I mean, it all starts with my dad. He was a Marine Corps sergeant. He played semi-pro football. He was a general superintendent for, at the time, the largest company in the world. And we had all girls. And he would bring us to the job site. So we did play a lot of football and, sports and things like that.
And he was hoping one of you was going to follow in his footsteps.
Oh, yeah. If you asked him, he's not with us anymore, but he would tell you unequivocally that he taught me everything I know. There's no question about that.
Yep.
But hunting, fishing, and being in the field was something that we grew up with and we got very comfortable with. And it's funny because I love telling the stories about my dad because in the industry, women sometimes hit challenges where, they get commentary and things that they have to deal with. And sometimes it's unexpected. So my dad, knowing this, was very good about, kind of setting the bar to where there was nothing that could shake me, right? So we'd be in the car on a Sunday drive and he'd be like, okay, everybody, we're getting ready to go under a bridge that a woman designed. So be careful. Oh, look, we made it, Or he'd say things like, can you believe they're letting women fly fighter jets nowadays? What has the world come to? And I have all these really cute little emails that he sends me about like a problem that was, like a airplane and everything. And boy, that pilot must have been, a good old boy to get her down. And then he'll say, oh, wait a minute. It was a woman. And so I grew up that way. That. So for me, there was no shaking me in the field. Yeah. And we were, kind of given this thought that you can accomplish anything, right?
Well, it's really interesting because I think what he was doing was trying to like make you prepare, but in a way it was also just building up.
Yeah.
The fact that women had done all these amazing things at the same
Of
time,
course.
which is like kind of genius in a way, right? Like it was like accomplishing two things at the same time.
Yes. He was very, very snappy about that for sure.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about is that I believe you guys have also issued your ESG report. And part of that, the S and the social, tell us about how you're measuring the impact of some of these things that you're doing.
So the social part is super important to us in our ESG report. And there's a whole, and I'm excited for everybody to read it. When we published our report for last year, there's a DEI section, right? And I have to say, like, it's super important for me to say this correctly. Again, the culture of Compass is what gives us the byproduct of a diverse workforce. And so we really want to focus on the fact that we're not just, we don't do tokenisms. We don't do, we hire because we want to hit a certain, level of diversity, whether it's gender diversity or ethnic diversity or whatever. We really embrace a culture that ends up becoming a byproduct of having a very diverse workforce. And our ESG report is going to point that out. And it's going to show the success that we've had in our growth, in our ability to be different and cutting edge and have a hugely diverse workforce. It is so cool to be with a company that celebrates the differences among us. It's so cool. And I love difference. I mean, I have 4 girls in my family, all very different. I have 3 children of my own, all very different. I love the differences amongst us. And I think our company really embodies that. And it's proving to be highly successful from a business standpoint.
Well, and the culture becomes a bit of a flywheel, right? The great culture helps you bring in more diverse people, which helps continue to build upon the culture, which helps bring in more people, right? And then at the end of the day, the byproduct of that great culture is business success.
Yes.
And I think, like I said, I go back to it at the beginning, like this is a question of, do you want to be more successful than you are today?
And by the way, it's more fun too.
It is way
more fun.
We all want to work someplace more fun. Trust me.
That's what I used to tell my kids growing up. I'd be like, every day they wake up, I'm like, what's your job? And they'd be like, to have fun. And I'm like, because when you get to be an adult, sometimes you forget how important that is.
Absolutely.
And if you're having fun, guess what? You're usually doing pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like work, right? If you're having fun doing it and you love it.
Right.
Well, maybe we'll talk about a topic that's a little less fun, and that
But this is fun for you, so I think that's a perfect segue.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue. I love data. Yeah, you've seen the podcast, you know it. I'm a nerd. You were on a podcast with Hugh Seaton, which he talks a lot about data and construction. And you noted that it's really important that some people don't always see things the same way that others do. Now, you talked about how you see data as a way to bridge that divide, to connect people with different perspectives, and to show what matters across all roles. How do you see technology and the emphasis on data-driven decision-making really shifting conversations around the gender gap and its impact on construction?
I mean, I've always been a huge fan of data. I think it's so powerful. And I think we have a lack of understanding of how valuable that can be. Even though, you'll hear people say like it's the biggest currency in today's world, and digitizing the planet is, the 5th industrial revolution, which is all true. But what I like to focus on when it comes to data is driving better behaviors, right? I really love the fact that when you have good data, you can make informed decisions. And there's a few quotes that I always like to use. One of my favorite ones is from Thomas Jefferson. And it was the whole, when the old coat doesn't fit, take it off and put on the new coat. That's what data can do for us. It can tell us like your old coat's not fitting anymore. We have new data and here's a new coat. Try it on, right? And I think it's so important for us to realize that this is the power of being able to slice it and apply it in ways that can make a big difference in how we make our decisions and also how we want to treat each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. You talked about people kind of being stuck in the way that they think, and that bringing together more perspective really, we talk about breaking outside of your rivers of thinking, right? The way that you've been just trained to think your entire lives. And I think data is another great way to do that. So when you combine those two things, you can really change the perspective that somebody has, because you're bringing a bunch of information that they didn't have before, whether it be an outsider's perspective, whether it be someone who thinks differently, or just data and spreadsheets that have been collected that allow us to have a new way of looking at something.
Well, and another thing that's cultural for our company is the staying curious. So data allows you to stay curious, right? And so asking the whys behind things is part of that critical thinking. And I don't think we have enough critical thinkers in the world because we get a lot of one-way information. So really encouraging us to look at data in more than one way and then stay curious and be open-minded so that you're okay to try the new code on, right? And ask questions. Say, ask why, and then ask why again. And just like our toddlers do, right? Say, but I don't understand. Tell me more. Explain to me, not just what you're telling me, but also what are the consequences for, this not being true or for someone else's perspective. I need to see it from both sides, right? Or from many sides. And so I love that. Stay curious. Our industry is so cool because you can never get bored in this industry. One of the most favorite things about it is it's continuous learning. Everyone you build for, you learn about. You learn about so many different businesses.
Every project's different.
So many walks of life, right? That's the exciting part about our industry. And that's another takeaway for the audience is it's a cool industry. It pays well. It's exciting. If you don't want a boring life, please come into the industry, right? And help us change it for the better.
This advertisement paid for by Procore.
I have never heard the word boring in construction ever in the same sentence.
Right. I love this idea of being more curious, ask more questions, whether it's of the people you work with, right? Learn more about them, learn more about the owner you're building for, or ask more questions of the data, right?
And again, it makes it more fun.
Oh, it makes it so much
more fun.
Love it. Love it.
This is Chris's love language. He's in his element. All we have to do is talk about dashboards at some point.
I just you can see the difference on the episodes where we talk about data. Just much more fun.
But I think data is important. And so I kind of want to bring us to another data point that when we look at research and we kind of look at from a gender equality standpoint, there was a recent research that was, I want to make sure I quote this correctly. Maryland University recently did a research, and it was actually a very interesting story that went into the genesis of the research. It was a young student whose wife was a civil engineer, and unfortunately she passed away from cancer. And he spent most of his life with her, watching her hit her head against a wall of some of this biases that exists within the industry, where she was never able to fully advance her career to where he thought she should have been given her qualifications before she passed from cancer. And so he became so impassioned by this. He said, I just need to see the data. I need to gather data, understand and make sense of it. And so from that incredible story came this research to the Maryland Institute. And so essentially they looked across 1,600 different LinkedIn profiles and surveys. And what they found was that men ascend into leadership roles with a single firm throughout their career at 4 times the rate that women do. And women ascend into executive roles when they finally do, have 56% more companies. So that means they've had to jump from company to company to do that, and held 19% more titles. So it means that women are having to take a jungle gym approach to getting their advancement in their career. And finally, more than half of women have a graduate degree.
Yeah.
Compared to less than 1/3 of men. So when you hear some of this data and you want to make sense of it, how does that get interpreted in your mind?
That is 100% the potential versus credential conundrum that we face, right? And it's on both sides. It's on both the leadership side and on the employee side, where we are systemically taught as women that we need lots and lots of credential. We have to check the box. We have to know exactly what we're doing before we take the next step. Men are not taught that. They're taught that they have potential and they can aspire to do things that they have, and they'll learn in the seat and on the go. And what really rang true for me was I spent many years in construction trying to figure out why we couldn't push women up. We could fill the pipeline, but we couldn't get them into higher ranks. And then when they get to the higher, even at mid-level, we had that drop off, right? So we were like, oh gosh, it must be the industry. This is such a terrible, this is really inconvenient. But really what happened was I took a break from the industry and I started, going to really prestigious conferences and trying to learn from outside industry, similar trends that we see within our industry. Because I was tired of blaming the industry, right? I was tired of that.
Exactly.
And so one of the conferences I attended was the Wall Street Journal Women in the Economy Conference. And I was very fortunate to sit right next to Laszlo Bock from Google, who wrote the book, Work Rules. And he was great because he said, he was on stage with Wall Street Journal. He said, it's interesting at Google, we're the largest data collectors in the world. And we have this self-promotion policy. And so everybody in our company puts themselves for promotion, they put themselves up when they feel they're ready. And it was fascinating. After 10 years, we looked at that data, and you know what we found out? When women put themselves up for promotions, they're given and awarded those promotions 90+% of the time. Yet the men were only awarded the promotions less than half the time.
Interesting.
And he said, why do you think that is? And I said, because I know why that is. Because the women have waited way too long, and they're far overqualified before they put themselves up. And the men are very quick to the draw. And he said, that's the potential versus potential.
Amazing.
Understanding that and being able to have leadership pull women up and point out when they have credentials or when they have potential and they don't need any more credentials is critical. And the whole statistic on the degrees is one of those things. I can't tell you how many times, I'm in conferences with leaders and they'll say, really what you need is someone to put you under their wing and show you the acumen of the business and, the ropes. You don't need another certification. You don't need another degree. You don't need more formal training. You need someone who's going to take you under their wing and show you the ropes. And it's a little bit harder sometimes when it's mixed gender, but it's what has to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, even my own career, the advancements I've been able to make in my career was always a male ally who kind of put his hand behind my back and shoved me a little bit and was like, nope, step up, sit down at the table. And when you're sitting there, and I distinctly remember the former CEO of Bluebeam, when he brought me into that executive suite and sat me at the table, he's like, and when you're sitting there, open your mouth.
Yeah.
I expect you to speak.
We want to hear your voice.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think there's a piece of that. And that kind of leads into another challenger issue that construction has is something we call a leaky pipeline. So you talked about we're bringing a lot of women on board, but we're also starting to lose them. And this idea of retaining that talent, I think a little bit of that allyship and mentorship is important in how we retain that talent. But you've really leaned into culture and you've really leaned into this as being the recipe or the vehicle of how you really address the leaky pipeline. Tell us about how you're leveraging culture in this way.
So the leaky pipeline is a result of systemic behavior within the industry where leaders in the industry can't envision somebody who's different than them, that has a different life than them, doing the same job, right? And think about it, it's a human thing. And so if you're a superintendent and your job is hard and you work 12 hours a day and you have to relocate and you have long commutes and you have all this to deal with, and you see a young female coming up in her career and you see that she might want to have a family or things like this, you tell yourself, oh, just to protect her, I'm going to have to pass her over, because there's no way she could do what I do without having what I have, and a lot of it's implicit. It's not explicit.
Right.
And much of it is done with good intentions of trying to, say, hey, if you're going to go out and have a kid, then maybe we should stick you in estimating. Do you have regular hours? And it'll be, and I have a great story about this. I have a really great story. It's a true story. Where I had hired, our company hired a couple. And one of the women worked for me, and she was the senior person. We had wanted her, we brought her husband along and said, we'll train him, but we want you, right? You're the one. So she makes more money. She's one, but they're early 30s. They want to start a family. She tells me she's going to start a family. She's on a big job, $100 million job, doing a great job, right? She's got it all planned out. Everything's perfect. She knows who's dropping off, who's picking up, because they are getting ready to start their family. And I go on vacation, I come back, and my employee is devastated, and she doesn't know what to do. And I said, what's going on? She said, well, my husband has been reassigned to a location where he can no longer do his part, in our caregiving. And I'm like, oh, well, I happen to know his boss. I'm going to go have a conversation. So, of course, I go have a conversation, and I'm like, tell me what's going on, because they're getting ready to have a baby, and they got it all worked out. And he was like, oh, just tell, your employee, she can work part-time, she can work on a swing, we can put her in estimate, we can do all these things, right? And I looked at him, I said, I'm not worried about my employee. She's like, I know how to take care of her. I'm good. We're good there. I said, what about your employee? What are you going to do? And he's like, well, and I said, I literally said to him, you're acting like having a child only impacts one part of this relationship.
Right.
And the other thing is, your suggestions for this couple might be something that they would opt for.
Right.
It might be. But you know whose choice it is? It's their choice. It's not your choice.
Yeah.
You need to give them the choice. So, of course, that's what happened. And he got put back into a place, a great job where that he could do his part. because they chose to both be in a career, right? And so it was just like, but if you don't have someone like myself who can go toe to toe with that senior person and put a different set of lenses on them,
Right.
so they can see their mistake. And this is literally what happens. It's like this aha moment. I mean, he literally said, I got that all wrong, didn't I? I'm like, yes, you did get it all wrong.
Well, at
right?
least you realized it quickly.
And that's 90% of what happens.
Yes.
You rarely ever get resistance when you put those lenses on. They go, oh, so this is why it's so important to get women into these rooms where they can have those conversations and put those different lenses on. Because again, implicit bias happens a lot.
Right.
Everyone has it. Everybody who's human has implicit bias because of our ways of systemic behaviors, all of that, right? Most of the biases that you see are not done with ill intent. It's like someone is, they think a certain way and they haven't had the different lenses put on them. That's all it is.
Yeah. And I've often said, and I think, Chris, I've even mentioned it, in my career, if I were to kind of like boil down what I do as a creative storyteller working within the business world is I live and create aha moments. It's having a conversation or telling a story in such a way that someone arrives at a kind of an intersection themselves and says, oh, wait, I hadn't thought of that. Or I hadn't considered it in that way.
Right.
Because we're so busy trying to achieve and to perform and to hit business metrics and to satisfy a suite of board members and publicly traded companies and privately held companies. We're trying to satisfy so many individuals. We often don't have the luxury of stepping back and asking ourselves, is there a different way to see this?
Yeah.
We're always in execution mode. And there's something that you said and I quoted you in our pre-interview. I thought it was so great. A rising tide lifts all boats. You make life better for women. You make life better for men.
That's true.
Tell me a bit about that and how you really see that happening at the company.
No, it's true. I mean, my husband's a master electrician. My dad was a cement mason before he was a general superintendent. It's hard work, right? It's hard labor. And I like the fact that a lot of the technologies we're talking about can neutralize some of that, right, for us. And it doesn't just neutralize it to allow women in the trades and to allow us to be more diverse. It also protects our men, who could use safer work environments, who could use, a longer career and enjoy a longer career. And whether you're in the white collar or the blue collar, realm of our industry, when you solve the problem for one, you solve it for both. I mean, every man I know wants to watch his kid play ball. And they want to watch their daughter in the dance recital or vice versa, or their daughter play ball and their son in the dance recital. They want to be home with their kids. They want to have a balanced life. They don't want to have long commutes. They don't want to work in conditions that are unfavorable. So it's not about special treatment for one versus the other. It's about changing our industry to attract the talent that we desperately need. That's what it is.
When you look at other innovations that are happening out in the market today in our industry, what excites you about the future? What are you really looking forward to? What are you, when you read an article about it, super excited for what's to come?
Well, I have to say, I'm a huge fan of AI, solving as many or more problems than it'll create. Because when I say AI, I think of it not just in the digital platform type of, ways to help us, or generative AI or that type of thing, but also the technical parts, right? The science behind it, the ability to study raw materials, the ability to fine tune things, the ability to be more sustainable, the ability to, just crunch numbers faster and learn about things in a more expedient manner. And the other thing that's cool about AI is it's less disruptive. And here's the analogy I like to use, because I think this will neutralize a lot of the positions when it comes to our ability to learn how to do things differently and more efficiently, right? So when you're driving a car and you have AIs learning how you drive, right? So if you go into the wrong lane, it buzzes at you. If you go too fast, you might have something that beeps at you that says you're going too fast. You can ignore it if you want to, or you can pay attention to it, and it's still going to continue to learn in the background. But you know what? It doesn't change how you learn how to drive. It doesn't change how you get your license. It doesn't change how the car is built. It doesn't change how, a car works. So the processes and the people behind that stays the same. But yet you have this powerful tool that's still learning and informing you, and you can make decisions about, how you want to react to that, right? So I'm really excited about the future of the industry when it comes to AI.
So AI becomes the aha machine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it, and I would summarize it as it maximizes our human expertise, right?
Yes.
You learned to drive. somebody taught you, your dad, your mom, your sister, your brother, your cousin, on a pickup truck in a field, or, on 95.
Exactly. A pickup truck on the way to the lake.
That's a pretty common story in our industry, right? Some people were driving around on a job site, right? And might even been a loader or something like that. But the reality of it is that the AI is there to help coach you and make you better.
Yes.
And not to downplay any of your expertise, but to maximize them. And then, hey, listen, there are times where I'm totally okay with not having to touch the wheel and let the car drive for myself, because I'd rather be focused on something else, and I can choose to do that.
Yeah.
I can choose when to use that automation when it makes the most sense.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So that's exciting. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that are happening for the future of the industry. Becoming more diverse was huge for me. There is, I should point out, I think we talked about this in the pre-talk, Sasha, is, the workforce is in trouble, in our industry. There's lots of funds, and building out the digital infrastructure. There's supply chain issues. There's other issues. There's geopolitical issues. There's all these things that are happening, right? There's energy shortages. Mm-hmm. These are problems that everyone's working on that will get solved, because, the mother of invention is basically having a need to do it. And we have a need, and we're going to figure this stuff out. But the workforce is the last thing AI is going to replace, okay? And we are in a crisis of an aging workforce. We are in a crisis of a workforce that, desperately needs to replenish itself and have that diverse perspective. And there was that roundtable at the White House that they basically finally acknowledged that this could be a national security concern, right, for us, because we have to stay at the front end of being able to build out this infrastructure, and it's all the critical infrastructures, not just data centers, but hospitals and bridges and roads and power plants and, you name it. So getting that workforce to join us and changing the industry to make it more palatable, more longer livelihoods, safer environments, all of that is going to matter to every human being, right? And also, when I like to talk about data centers, because I think the digital infrastructure is so critical, I also like to bring up the digital divide. And there are about 3 billion people on the planet who don't even have access to this data. So in order to make this wonderful tool of information and this repository of the biggest currency we have right now available and equalizing, the opportunities, you have to close that divide. It's important.
It's one of the things I get most excited about, honestly, with AI is its ability to bridge that gap and close the skills gap necessary to get information you need, whether it's through the technology or just being able to ask questions and get answers. And I think there's a huge amount of promise that are there. And, we're at Groundbreak, and the theme is connecting people and technology. So, the reality is I don't think either of them stands alone. The workforce is going to be more and more necessary. It is so incredibly important to our future, and it's going to be there side by side.
Well, and think about the generative part of this, and the machine learning, because that's part of that staying curious.
Yep.
You're not getting one-way information. You can ask more, and it prompts you to ask more questions. Oh, but why is that? Oh, but I want to look for more stuff. It's stay curious, right? It's so much better than seeing something on TV and just getting one piece of information from a perspective, versus asking the questions that you want to ask and then asking again and more and deeper, right?
Nerd alert. One of my favorite ChatGPT prompts is ask me 20 questions about this before you give me an answer. By the way, 20's too many. I can tell you from experience. 5's probably enough. And if you feel like it hasn't asked enough, ask more. But by the time you get 10 through, you're like, okay, 20 was a little long.
It's trying too hard.
It's trying too hard. But that is so good about staying curious. And if we can teach technology to be curious too, that's going to be really exciting.
Yep.
Well, we've reached that part of the podcast where I ask you our 5 rapid fire questions. So we're looking for short, concise answers here. And I'll kick off with the first one. What book have you read or are you reading that you would recommend to others?
Getting to 50-50.
Great. What is your go-to source for gaining different or a more informed perspective?
I mean, it's definitely using AI. Yeah, I do a lot of ChatGPT, So, and I like to get different perspectives. So I like to prompt it to force me to get different perspectives.
That's interesting. I never even thought about prompting to take a different point of view than I have.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I learned something
all
today.
About the prompts.
If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm going to have to give you 2 pieces.
Okay, 2 pieces is okay.
The first one is don't cross bridges till you get to them. you're going to be able to cross those bridges. So don't preempt it by saying, I can't do that. That bridge isn't there yet. You'll figure it out. And then the second one is, and this is really just for me, but maybe it applies to some of you, and it's literally, don't let your facts get in the way of your message. You have an important message. You have enough credential. State your facts. Don't let your facts get in the way of your message.
Love that.
What's one trend or innovation you think could shape the future of our industry?
AI.
We hit that one already. It's cheating. All right. And my favorite question, if construction as an industry had a tagline, what would it be?
Stay curious. Never be bored.
That's another good one.
Wow,
Man.
that's so good. Nancy, thank you so much for sitting down with us. We really appreciate you joining us here today.
It's been fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for adding a little fun into the podcast. And for those of you who have been listening along, if anything that you've heard today has resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. And we'll keep bringing you the stories of leaders who are reshaping our industry, harnessing the power of construction.